I'm Will, welcome back to the Bald Book Geek, and this video is not sponsored by CreateSpace. I don't know if you're like me, but in the summer I tend to read a little bit differently to how I read in the winter. I tend to go for lighter books, or books that are more comforting, or books that I've read a few times, and books that I love. So I decided to go for my rereads and pick 5 books that I think you guys would enjoy and to read this summer. I mean, before we get this started, I'd be interested to know what books you're reading this summer, because I always ask this question at the end of the video and no one ever watches to the end of the video, so please comment. 5 books I think you guys will love this summer. My first one is A Good Year. This is an unusual book because it exists in a weird point and weird circle. It was turned into a film with Russell Crowe. This really good, lovable, charming, very British film. On the other side of it, the book is slightly different, but they have the basic premise. Rich guy inherits uncle's vineyard in France, south of France, ends up going over and has a life-changing experience. He tends to write books like this, and I mean, it's a great little read. It's light, it's easy, it's perfect just for reading on a quick go. It's reasonably short, you can read this quite quickly. So that is A Good Year. I would also recommend his other books, A Year in Provence and Bon Appetit, because they are these great little summer reads. Beyond. Now, this is her debut novel. I've talked about this book, and I called it one of those great little books that only comes along once in a lifetime. Essentially, it's a British YA about a 14-year-old boy and his life around his sister who has cancer. You would think it would be quite a depressing book, but actually it's beautifully written and very uplifting in parts. And it has this kind of light John Green vibe, but it's an enjoyable read. And she is a fantastic writer, and I will say this is her only book so far. I can't wait for more from her, and I follow her on Twitter and Instagram, and she's really cool. Honestly, I can't wait. I think this book is one of those that you won't be able to put down. It's YA, so it's relatively easy reading, but it's well written, great story construction, great characters that you fall in love with, and a very from-the-heart plot. It's not your typical kid with cancer book that we saw after the publication of A Fault in Our Stars. And it's also nice to have a very British voice in this kind of book as well, because we seem to lack those. Memoirs of a Geisha. This book is somewhere between fact and fiction. It's a fictionalised account and juicy details of the geisha. It's based on real research, but it fictionalises a lot of elements. So it's more like a very hyper-reality version of what was really going on. This is one of those books that kind of started my love of historical fiction. The book and the film are very different, and they frame the story very differently. In the book, at the end, you suddenly realise she's telling you this story as a little old lady, and maybe her narration is not as reliable as you would think, and maybe she's just enhancing it from her own memory. It's one of those books that got me into historical fiction. This is a book I revisit every summer. It's visually very interesting, and if you're like me and you play it in your head like a film, this is one of those books to read. And I also want to say, the film is also very good, but very different. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is a book I have read and talked about many, many times in my life. It's a coming-of-age story. It deals with problems in 1930s America, and it is just a beautiful book. It's beautiful, and it's one of those books that gets you involved in the characters, and I'm slightly obsessed with this edition because how pretty is that? But it's a book that I've read and reread many times. Scout is a beautiful character, and what goes on around her, and as she grows and she becomes this young woman almost that's maybe grown up a little bit too fast. To Kill a Mockingbird is a great classic, and one of those books that I think is also extremely socially important. It's not that long ago, but we're still learning lessons from this book. Meddling Kids. Now, this book made my best books of last year list, and I've slightly damaged it, which is really annoying. So think Scooby-Doo. Stranger Things meets Scooby-Doo. Lots of 1990s nostalgia. It's well written. It's great fun. It's not scared to laugh at itself in places, but it's also really spooky and can be quite scary in places as well. So basically, 4 kids and their dog solve mysteries, and when they all in the 70s, and when they all go their separate ways and come back together in the 90s, is not an old man in a costume in some creepy roller disco. This is a very good book, and I absolutely love it. Although I think we did get the short end of the deal with the cover in the UK. I just want to say that. Like, the US and the South American cover is gorgeous. That's Meddling Kids. So, like I said at the start of the video, tell me what you guys are reading, and tell me what you guys like to read for the summer. As always, like and subscribe, and do hit that little bell icon somewhere, because subscription feed doesn't work, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.